we're okay. The broadcast is up. We're not even close to the end because we haven't hit the really controversial stuff yet.
Ah, good.
So I know we've had an awful lot of talk about the courts and the death, but just you wait because we get into some philosophy stuff. It's a lot of fun.
Rabbi, we have 3 witnesses. You here.
I
could have done the whole thing and done with it.
too many moving parts for this week. Maybe next. No, next time you're not going to be
I'm
here.
not
So
going to be here. Yeah.
I will work it out. We will take care. Okay. Anyway, to business. Sanhedrin.
And hopefully will not be more tarot or more shivot on Wednesday.
Oh, Shiva, yeah.
No, I told him that I'm already afraid to wake up on Wednesday. Like for 3 weeks was every Wednesday and Shiva. Every Wednesday.
No, it was every other. Because it was just disruptive enough.
Shalom, but
Of Shalom, you had Shiva. Right. See, I only take care of the one congregation, so yeah. Okay. So yes,
I learned more. Okay.
God willing, we will be able to continue to study in peace and in good health for all of us and all of our friends and community.
Yeah. Okay.
But for those that are wicked, we have to execute them. And that's what we're back into. We're still finishing up execution. Now, again, why is Sanhedrin dealing so much with capital crimes? I mean, there's so much more that goes on during a court. And indeed, there are other discussions of some other lower court functions in other parts of, Sanhedrin we've seen, but also other parts of the Mishnah. But you've probably, I think, noticed we've been spending 80% of our time in capital cases and executions. Why so much effort?
Trying to avoid killing people. Minimize it.
Right. To try to avoid killing people, I'm gonna back up a little bit. The rabbis have no problem killing people. Right? They talk about it very matter-of-factly.
But for the right reasons.
For the right reasons and the right people. Right. So there is a borderline paranoia that we might execute the wrong person. And that is a crime for 2 reasons. One, it is a crime because the wrong person is dead. And that is one of the worst things, if not the worst things that we can do. Because once the life has been taken, it can never be restored to that person. You know, if you make a mistake regarding who owns the ox, you can always go back next week and move the ox back to the other guy, or even just move the money and you can fix it. Once the person's had their head chopped off, you can't say, oops, sorry. So that doesn't work, right? The second reason is spiritual. It's not just the ethical, but the spiritual, that if a crime has been committed, then the proper person must be brought to trial in order for true atonement to be achieved, not just for them, but for the overall world and community. There is a ritual for the Egala Rufa, for a cow that you break its neck if you find a body in the middle of nowhere and there's no way to track down the killer. Because even though nobody around is necessarily the culprit, it could have been some random person who wandered in, killed somebody, and wandered off. There needs to be some reckoning. There needs to be some statement of atonement for this crime. That the capital crimes need a reckoning. So we've got to get the right person, and we've got to not get the wrong person. Those are the twin passions of Jewish law at this highest level of court proceedings. And it's really, really hard to balance those. Because as we know, sometimes you might let a bad person go rather than risk setting a precedent that might eventually come to convict and execute the right person. But as we're going to see in just a minute, there's some problems with that balance that needs rebalance. So 9-4 is going to be just seeming calm, and 9-5 is where the fireworks happen. So I need a volunteer, or are you just going to take turns going around the table? All right, Steve.
He who incurs 2 death penalties imposed by the court is executed by the more severe.
Again, you have to recognize this as being atonement is only achieved by having the proper punishment for the correct crime. And since you can only kill someone once, you need the maximum atonement that can come, and the maximum atonement comes from whichever penalty goes with the more severe crime. And we've been talking about the severity of crimes throughout, so we don't need to rehash that.
If he committed one sin for which a twofold death penalty is incurred, he is executed by the more severe. Rabbi, it's not Jose.
Yossi.
Yossi.
Yeah.
Rabbi Yossi says he is judged according to the first penalty which was placed upon him.
All right, so we got a little bit of a machlok, a little bit of a debate here. So first of all, what's the difference between part 1 and part 2? Aren't they saying the same thing?
Basically.
No, not basically. So the first part is saying if he incurs death penalties, right, 2 death penalties, it means he's done 2 separate acts. The second one, he did only 1 act, but that act, and you can read the comments below to find some of the creative things people can do to get 2 death penalties with 1 blow. That act came with 2 separate death penalties. If he had done only half the act, in quote, take, for example, he commits adultery with his married daughter. Right? He is guilty of sleeping with his daughter, and he's guilty of sleeping with another man's wife. Right? Both of those separately and independently would carry the death penalty. But he did it 2 birds with 1 stone.
Very efficient.
Very efficient, exactly. A way to maximize your sin.
But we didn't say that the problem is more for the female and for the male, that when they make adultery, is the female more the one that has all the burden more than the male?
No, not the burden. No. She has to be the married one for it to be adultery. But they are both, if assuming it's consensual, they are both guilty equally. Right? But he would be guilty of having slept with his daughter, and he would be guilty of having slept with another man's wife. Either one of those would get him killed anyway, but he's done them at the same time. How do we kill him? Do we kill him as we would kill an adulterer, or do we kill him as someone who commits incest? And the answer is you kill him by the most severe. Now, Rabbi Yossi disagrees. Rabbi Yossi says if it's the single act with 2 penalties, you simply give him the penalty that was first placed against him, right? Whatever was first,
In this case, a daughter, being with a daughter.
whichever category existed first, and then the Talmud will go into much more detail, which we're not going to do tonight, about how you count first or second in some of these. I mean, does it count as adultery first, or because that's, in quote, more severe? That's what the other rabbis say. Or does it count as it was your daughter before he was...
Yeah. By time. It's first the
Or it could be by
adultery.
time. So that's partly how they answer. It gets hashed over in other text. But the basic idea is that he's saying whichever one precedes the other, that's how the punishment goes. But the rabbis, again, are most concerned that the person receive maximum kapara, maximum atonement. And the way you receive maximum atonement is by having the maximum penalty for your bundle of crimes levied against you. And when that comes for a death penalty case, that means you're going to be executed by the most severe form. We got people wandering in, or
I don't know if she's.
are they still chatting in the? No, that's one of our teachers for the school. She
Okay.
was here for the meet and greet and just going home.
So you say that by Rabbi Yossi, there's several possible discussion. What does it mean to be the first enjoy? The first that happened, or the first that started the process,
Or
or the first intention? Like,
let's look at Bavli sometime together. I don't want to get into it without having the concrete examples.
yeah, but
I know.
It's like,
So
We don't
immediately,
really
hold
see
on.
it.
So Natan, immediately you can see why we have the Bavli and not just the Mishnah.
okay.
Because every single line has lots and lots of different questions of, well, wait, what about this? Or what about that? And that's why the Talmud itself was written on top of the Mishnah. Because the Mishnah is not self-explanatory. The Talmud's not self-explanatory either. But I really want to save time for the philosophical discussion that we can have without the weird practical implications of the other case that comes in 9.5. So, moving on to 9.5.
He who was flogged and then flogged again for 2 transgressions and then sinned again is placed by the court in a cell and fed with barley bread until his stomach bursts.
Go ahead and read the next one.
One who commits murder without witnesses is placed in a cell and forcibly fed with bread of adversity and water of affliction.
Okay. What just happened?
Third time offender here.
Right. Well, to expand it a little bit, you got a third-time offender who has committed a crime that is not a capital offense.
Yeah.
But it's the same crime repeatedly and defiantly of all the court's efforts to correct their behavior. And at this point, the court says, well, we can't kill him directly because he hasn't committed a capital crime. But this person is a presumably danger and destructive element to our society. So
3 strikes and you're out.
we got to get rid of him.
What about Gerush?
We send them away?
Yeah.
To where?
Exile.
You-
You kick them from the community. The community has certain laws, and if after 2-3 opportunities he doesn't know how to behave according to the law of the community, you don't belong to us, so bye-bye. Kick you out from the community, so go to a different country.
You have,
Exile.
you have no, and the rabbis do. Now, what is their compassion? Right? Well, how do they treat him?
I didn't kill him.
Oh, well-
I said I exiled him.
But that's where you are callous, right? So we discussed before, occasionally the rabbis do entertain the notion that sometimes the best thing for somebody who is committed to a life of sin is to save them from the life of sin by removing the life, right? If you know this person is going to continue to make their life worse, and by extension, yes, the life of those around them, then you need to help reduce the amount of sin that they can commit. If you send them away, that's only going to exacerbate the sins they commit. That's terrible for them. They will be punished and punished and punished and punished, for all of their transgressions. Much better to simply place them in a room and feed them, but feed them something that will, in its own way, kill them.
What about education? What about the punishment will be like attend yeshiva with a rabbi and study? Not really, because
No.
maybe he's misbehaving because he doesn't know the Torah.
Right.
So let's do a different approach and
Okay.
make him 1 year studying Torah and see what happens.
So the general
Could be
understanding
something like
the general understanding of this section is this is not you spit on the sidewalk, we flogged you. You spit on the sidewalk, we flog you. You spit on the sidewalk, we feed you and you die. That it is not for either minor transgressions, it's not for transgressions that a person has shown regret over and has shown an attempt to try and change their behavior, but has failed and backslid. Is that the right? Backslid, has slid back into their old ways. This is for someone who is unrepentant and aggressively committing transgression after transgression after transgression. So education is obviously the rabbi's first answer. If you can get the person to do tshuva and change what they're doing, that is ideal, right? Hareze meshubach. If you can get them to diminish what they're doing in frequency or intensity, that is enough to show progress. This is for the, incorrigible cases.
But there's not so much compassion here
Because
because you kill them in a slow move. Like instead, we said, we spoke that all the time that they try to kill someone
Right.
need to be in a way that they will not suffer. Here, killing someone by bread and water takes a long time and the person suffer a lot. So it's counterintuitive going against all the education and all the procedure and all the ideas that they expressed at the beginning of Sanhedrin.
which is why this is such an interesting halacha. I mean, it is so counter to everything we've been doing. I love when I reach this part and I'm studying with someone and they go, wait a minute. We've been defending the rights to a fair trial, defending the rights to a quick and as painless as possible execution, and defending the rights to have any witness or any evidence brought. And now for somebody who has not earned the death penalty, they haven't committed a capital crime, or in the case of someone who committed murder, they did it in a way that sidesteps the normal proof that we require. We're killing them, and we're killing them in an agonizing way. We're feeding them food that will deliberately cause their stomach to burst, and so they die internally, which is not fun. It certainly is more painful than any of the other forms of execution that we've seen. How do we reconcile this? Okay, so there's a way to reconcile this with that delicate balance that I was talking about, which is we have to find a way to seek atonement for the crime that was committed. And we have to find a way to make sure that we do not take a life incorrectly. The balance that they try to achieve here is based on the idea that they are not directly killing the person, that they have a high enough degree of confidence that they are sure this person is a menace to themselves in society or an actual murderer, but because their hands cannot kill the person, they use this as their backup method. And looking in the room, no one seems happy about this. So let me tell you what
I throw you to and catch full of lion. I don't kill you, okay? You are
Okay.
there. I don't kill you. Come on.
So hold on.
Really? That's hypocrisy.
Let me give you a true story, right? Not personally true story, but true story from Jewish history. Middle Ages, Spain, under Muslim rule. Jews had a surprising degree of freedom and autonomy, and were often very well respected within the broader community. And it was called often the Golden Age of Spain. Now, it depended on which Muslim group was in charge. There were good times and bad times, but sometimes it was really quite excellent. Rabbi comes from Europe, from the Ashkenazic world, down to the Sephardic world where this is happening. Ashkenazic world, we had on again, off again, okay relations with our Christian kings and bishops and all of that, but generally it was mostly off again. It was more tolerance than actual autonomy like we had in the Iberian Peninsula. So this rabbi comes from Ashkenaz, and he comes to the community, and he's there visiting and learning and studying, and they have a Beit Din. And a man comes into the court, and they are trying him for murder. And the rabbi says, wait a minute, you can't do a trial for murder. You're not a Sanhedrin. You know, since the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, we have not been allowed to do this type of trial. And they said, yes, but if we don't, the other group will. And so for our society's survival and stability, and in order to save the innocent people who would be caught up in the other judicial system from being killed, we have to police our own by these rules, because that's the only way that we can truly even come close to surviving. Good decision or bad decision? They knew that they were taking steps that were over the line of normal halakha. In normal halakha, you're not going to find rabbis saying, hey, let's get together and decide if we're going to execute someone. Even if it meets all the other criteria we've discussed, you're not going to find anyone from around, at least 500, 700 CE on convening a court, except in these rare cases.
What we call this Tovatakla. What to do in order to improve the majority of the population, the community, to survive it.
Right.
So that's the concept.
And that is also the underlying idea here. When the Talmud begins discussing of this and how difficult it is to put together a Beit Din that will meet the criteria necessary for a capital case, Rabbi Akiva, they say if there was somebody executed every 70 years, it's considered or every 7 years, it's a bloody court. And Rabbi Akiva says if I was on the court, they wouldn't be executed every 70 years. Right? It'd be even less. I'd make sure that nobody was executed. And another rabbi retorts and says, Akiva, if you do that, you will spread blood throughout our community. That if people know that there really is no way to ever be convicted, then you will find that a certain element, a percentage of the population, will take advantage of that. If people knew, and I think it even came up in this class, if you kill the witnesses, you may have multiplied the murders, but there's no way for them to execute you because they need witnesses in order to do it. Remember, as we were talking about, the witnesses had to warn them, the witnesses had to be present and visible. Well, if I see two guys watching me and I'm going to kill someone, the first thing I do after killing this guy is kill them. And as long as there aren't two people watching me kill them, presto, I'm innocent. The rabbis knew that they needed an escape clause, that if things got too bad, that they would have to allow extrajudicial containment. This is the fail-safe to prevent total societal meltdown. Hold on.
Why? Then put it out in the open. Why hide behind the pretense that the food killed him? I didn't kill him.
Who's going to be the person who executes them?
Usually means the witnesses.
Right. There are no witnesses,
No witnesses. Yeah.
right? Or it wasn't a crime that demanded witnesses for an execution.
So they say God
Right. How can my hand? Remember all the way back in the story of Joseph and his brothers, right? What was Reuben's argument to try and save Joseph? You remember? Right. All the brothers get together and they've got Joseph and they are going to kill him because he's obnoxious. And what do they say? Or what does Reuben pipe up to say?
He's our brother. Let's give to someone else.
Now that's Judah. Reuben says, let us not spill his blood. Let us throw him into this pit.
Yeah.
And then he'll die that way. And that way our hand should not be upon him, right? It wouldn't be our hand that took his life. He was doing that as a ploy because he wanted to come back later to save him, but he wasn't willing to stand up to the mob. And then in the meantime, before he could get back, that's when Judah had the bright idea, hey, if we sell him, we can be rid of him and make some money. But the idea that you do not want to be the person who spills the blood of this other person is a very, very strong idea. So if we know we want this person gone, and we really feel that in these exceptional circumstances that we need this person to be gone, who do we ask to take on the potential burden of guilt for having taken this life?
I see your argument, Robert, but do you see that there's a problem here?
Of course.
For example, okay, the example of killing the witness, okay? If I kill the two witnesses and all the judicial system is around the witnesses, okay? You need to, and because I don't have the witnesses, I decide that this person I think is guilty, so I want to kill him with water and bread.
Right.
But how do you know that really he was the person that killed the witness if you don't have any witness?
So hold
in the
on.
future,
Hold on. Let me give you.
loophole for the whole system.
All right. So first of all, within the American system, we kill people without witnesses all the time. The average murder case in America does not rely on eyewitness testimony. The average murder case relies on circumstantial evidence, right? They were in the right place. They had a motive. We have DNA evidence. The bullet matches their gun. All of that kind of stuff. Let me give you an example of what they probably faced of where this works. We've got a house, right? And I'm standing outside the house over here. And I see this guy with his sword go in the house and come out the other side. And while he's in, I hear screams and blood coming out of the door. And he comes out carrying his knife, looking sweaty, and it's dripping blood. But I did.
Maybe it was a savage dog.
And I look inside the house because I'm running after him, and all I see are his victims, and there's an empty house. According to all the things we've set up to this point, I can't convict him. Or let's imagine there was only one witness of an unimpeachable reputation who said, I saw him kill him, and someone else was standing next to me, but he didn't see the murder. He only saw him go in the house, right? That's like 1.5 witnesses. Nobody can really deny that he did it, but our hands are tied. But we know he did it. What do? Now, in American law, we basically say we throw them away in prison forever. And that's been our way of washing our hands of this subject. Pardon the metaphor from another religion. Their system was to have him die in this other way, but don't we do the same? I mean, do you feel guilty that there are people in prison that we didn't have enough evidence to execute them for their crime, or we didn't even set that as a standard, but we're pretty kind of sort of reasonably sure, and so we put them away in prison for the next 80 years? That okay? Because we're not killing them, we're just putting them in prison.
At the end, I was the more compassionate one when I kicked them out of the community.
Again,
Just
except there's been no atonement.
And you're,
he will do the atonement when he will die with God.
well,
Mm,
no.
A lot of time that we say, you know what, the punishment of death is in the hand of God. So I can apply the same idea. The punishment of death for this
Right.
this person in the hands of God.
But the defense of the community is in our hands.
And you're pushing him onto another community. You're still endangering other people.
They're not us.
They're not us. I wanted to play a nice way political correct.
There is no nice way to put that, right? They're not us. So who cares what he does to them? Meh? No, we're not. Meh.
Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe he goes to a different place, see a different religion, different customs, and he see the light and change. Who knows?
Maybe. But-
Who knows?
I'm not expecting you to be all 100% happy with this, because the rabbis themselves don't just sit down and say, oh, okay. They argue vociferously throughout the ages of exactly when such a thing could be applied. And that ultimately comes back to the training that Mishnah and Talmud and rabbinic literature is trying to give us, which is there are a set of rules, but the rules have to be applied according to, pardon the pun, judicious discretion. So although it's possible that you could say, hey, I flogged him twice, third time I get to kill him in this indirect way, no rabbi ever did that because that impulse was tempered by everything else they had studied. And on the other hand, somebody who had left bodies and bodies and bodies of witnesses, but didn't have just enough witnesses against him, the rabbis also felt had gone far enough that they needed to be dealt with. And the gray area in between, that's why you have judges, is in order to try and make those decisions on a case-by-case basis. It's impossible to simply create an algorithm that will tell you this crime, this testimony, this punishment. Simple stuff, maybe, but the complicated things, which is what we're talking about here, the rabbis felt it needed to be in the tool belt of what the court could do, but it shouldn't be the first thing you reach for. And when you reach for it, you need to be thinking about why you're reaching for it, not just because I don't like the guy. So it's a really stark and painful reminder that judging requires people, and the people have to be trained to look a certain way at cases and at other people, and to make decisions based upon all of that training in these hard cases.
For this punishment, which majority do you need to follow? Special majority or
The usual,
the usual?
Yeah.
Nothing special.
nothing special. Let's move on. Because I want to finish up 9 and see if we can start the first Mishnah of chapter 10. All right, 9:6.
If one steals the sacred vessel called a kaspa,
Mm-hmm.
or cursed by the name of an idol, or has sexual relations with an Aramaean,
Now that was a standard word for a non-Jewish woman in the ancient world.
he is punished by zealots.
Okay. Controversy number 2 for tonight.
What, Pinchas?
Pinchas, exactly, is an example. So punished by the zealot means if the person is in the midst of the act, literally in the midst of the act, and that goes for the last one as well, then somebody who is zealous for God can stop them immediately, but only in that immediate moment, right? It's not, I heard you had sex with somebody last night. It's not, somebody told me that you were cursing with an idol. It's as he is cursing with the idol's name, you can strike him down in a fit of zealous rage and not be punished. Waiting for people to adjust to that idea.
Are you sure that he's doing whatever you think that he's doing?
Okay. And that's then where you get the walking it back of saying, okay, but only in these narrow cases and only when it is obvious and only when it is clearly going to be demonstrated that you were right. You can't simply go to the court and say, oh, he cursed by such and such, idol's name, so I had to kill him. And they go, oh, okay. No, you still need proof that what you were doing.
So witnesses?
How else, right? You can't just, otherwise whoever committed murder, I ran into the house and wouldn't you know it, by gum, they were cursing by an idol's name. So I just had to kill them to defend God's honor. And that's, Your Honor, is the whole truth. No, you still need proof that what you were doing was because of this. But because there are examples within the Torah, Pinchas being the most prominent, Phineas in the English translation, of people killing someone in the midst of committing one of these acts, the last one, as the case may be, and they were honored for it, the rabbis are kind of stuck. They can't just say you're never allowed to ever kill anyone zealously because we've got a poster boy who did and seemed to get praised for it. Now, in many other midrashim and other teachings, the rabbis try to hem in what Pinchas did and try to defang it and make it so that it is not the norm and people don't think that this is a good idea, and even say he may have been sort of rewarded, but he was also kind of punished. But they did have to leave some vestige of that act on the books because it's in the book. And this is where it shows up. A few more cases that are similar.
I have a question.
Yes.
There was a case in Israel a year ago. A guy attacked LBTG.
In the homosexual parade, yes, the gay pride parade.
And he killed a girl. Yeah, he killed a girl.
Yeah, who, by the way, was not a member of the homosexual community, but was
Yeah.
there to support her friend.
Yeah, but he killed her.
Yes.
And I think this was his defense. He
Oh,
was saying,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So was the, I don't even want to say his name, who killed Rabin.
Rabin.
His defense as well was, I have to be zealous. He was betraying Israel. He used the language of Rodef explicitly. That Rabin was a Rodef. He was a pursuer who was going to kill Jews by his agreement with peace with the Palestinians. Therefore, I have to kill him. And that was his defense all the way through to this day. And the court said no. And the court also said, with the LGBT, the gay pride attacker, no, that this is not an excuse. That even had you hit the person or the people that you wanted to hit, as opposed to someone who, by your own definition, was innocent. Obviously, all the people he wanted to hit were innocent, but the person he killed was doubly innocent because it wasn't even the member that he was trying to attack, which is part of the problem of going off and killing people because you think they're doing something wrong. Even if you had, no, we did not need you acting with zeal at that time. And zeal, the rabbis are also very clear, cannot be premeditated. You can't say, I'm so angry that I am going to go kill someone tomorrow. That's not zealotry. Zealotry is, I can't believe I'm seeing it, and you attack. If you have time to plan what you're about to do.
So you need to be psycho in
What's
order
that?
to be fine. You need to be psycho in order to be fine.
It needs to be spontaneous. We're not going to say psycho. I'm going to say spontaneous, right? Well, look, I'm sure that most of us in this room would not consider themselves likely to commit violence. But I imagine most of us, if we were honest with ourselves, could imagine a hypothetical situation where we might be pushed at just the wrong moment where we would lose our ability to stop ourselves. And it might even be a justifiable and reasonable moment, somebody attacking our family or something like that. And the idea here is that there are certain things that are so against the nature of Judaism that the rabbis, by precedent in the Torah, know that some people might flip a switch. So they can't say it's impossible ever, but they can, again, in other texts more explicitly say, yeah, but you've got about a 1 second window of opportunity. Because as soon as you have a chance to think about this, the correct response is, I will bring this person to court. Zealotry is a moment. So the whole idea, and I've seen people try to use this text in this way, but the whole idea that this justifies Jewish terrorist attacks or suicide bombers or anything like that is totally bogus. If you have time to go to the store and buy the gun and buy the ammo, you are not a zealot. You're a terrorist. You're planning it. If you have a time to build an explosive device, you're a terrorist. You're not a zealot. You do not have time to plan for this. This is a spontaneous emotional outburst. And these are the only cases where there is even a shred of conscience. And within the modern world, and for most of Jewish history, the rabbis have also said, yeah, but don't. That even though it may technically be within a window, it has been regulated away from being a viable opportunity. And so people should not ever entertain the notion of acting in this way. Let's finish off this Mishnah.
If a priest performed temple service while impure, his fellow priests do not bring him to the court, but rather the young priest taken out to the courtyard and split his skull with clubs. Okay, so priests have their own rules. The Kohanim are an interesting group. Someday it'd be fun to go through all the different Mishnayot and Sugiyot sections of the Talmud that deal with the Kohanim and their unique outlook on life. What the rabbis are referring to here is less what they propose and more of what they know the Kohanim do. This is internal Kohen activity. It'd be like saying, if you steal from the mob, they dip your feet in cement and throw you off the boat. That doesn't mean when I say that, I encourage people to put feet in cement and throw them off the boat. I'm just telling you what's going to happen. And the Kohanim have had, in different points in our past, their own set of rules that they police themselves by. And that doesn't mean that the rabbis are necessarily agreeing with it, but sometimes they recognize the limitation of their authority to go in and stop it.
What does it mean, serves well tamei?
It means that he does a sacrifice while he is ritually impure. So yesterday he was burying someone, and today he goes in without having become ritually clean to the temple, and he does a sacrifice. And someone says, hey, but I saw you at the funeral. This is what they do. The Kohanim were a violent bunch.
So the rabbi couldn't control the Kohanim because they were two different groups that they fought at the same time.
Mostly, yes.
So that's the reason why, in a way, to say, what, let's be pragmatic.
Well, they do and they don't. So the rabbis try to exert influence. Sometimes they try to describe what should be done, and sometimes they describe what they've tried to do. But it definitely feels like the rabbis have a tenuous grip over the Kohen's own internal practice. They've got some control over some of the rituals and how they are done, especially Yom Kippur. If you read the section in Yoma, that's a very big issue of how Yom Kippur is handled. But there's a huge range of activities that the rabbis seem to say, the Kohanes handle it that way. And that's not exactly what we think, but that's how they handle it.
Pick your fights.
Kind of, yeah. It's a very interesting balance between the two. And over the long term, the rabbis won. When the temple was destroyed and the Kohanes lost their ability to have that real cohesive internal club, the rabbis became the dominant voice for how Jewish law and Jewish practice was going to be observed.
But up until that point, the Kohanim had their own understanding of how to administer halacha in certain instances. And this is one of the most blatant. Onward.
A layman who performed the service in the temple, Rabbi Akiva says he's strangled, but the sages say his death is at the hands of heaven.
All right, so we know that somebody who isn't a Kohen is prohibited from administering a service, prohibited upon penalty of death. The question is only how. And the answer that they come up with is, well, Rabbi Akiva says kill him outright, and the other sages say no. If God wants him dead, God will take care of it.
So could be like in this case, because it's an infraction against God, that's why it's in the hand of heaven. But in our previous discussion, because it's an infraction against humanity, that's why the rabbi need to do the water and bread.
I think that is
not give them in the hand of heaven.
I think that is an excellent way to look at it. The rabbis also were very concerned about stopping activities that would erode and destroy the society. One random person who somehow is able to sneak in and perform a service is not going to collapse the entirety of civilization. One person who is running around murdering or continually flouting the basic standards of behavior such that they're getting flogged repeatedly for the same exact thing and they're unrepentant about it, that becomes a thorn that could really weaken the community. So I think you're right, that there's definitely that element to it. All right, just because I really, really want to make sure you come back next week, we're going to go ahead and start 10:1 because we're not going to finish it. I guarantee it. You ready?
All Israel have a portion in the world to come, for it says, your people, all of them righteous, shall possess the land forever. They are the shoot that I planted, my handiwork in which I glory.
Okay, beautiful quote from Isaiah, one of the most uplifting prophets of all time. And what does this mean that we all have a portion in the world to come? What is the world to come? Is that, Florida, as people used to joke who don't live in Florida? Is that the retirement village?
The villages.
Yeah. Well, what is the world to come? Olam haba. Okay, Gan Eden is another way of putting it. So the term Olam haba generally is the afterlife. It is used both to describe the second life we receive upon resurrection after the coming of Mashiach and the perfection of the world, and also the purely spiritual existence that continues for all eternity. It's a little iffy necessarily which one we're talking about here. As we'll see, there's good arguments for both. But the idea that if we just use the term afterlife is probably a good substitute for the moment. So everybody in Israel, every member of the tribe, as we say, automatically has a place in the afterlife. You're in the club, right? And where do we get that from? Your people, all of them righteous, right? Everybody is worthy of the world to come. We're all set. Sounds great. Good. Next line.
And these are the ones who have no portion in the world to come.
All right, we are talking about spiritual oblivion. And when we say they have no portion in the world to come, we mean their soul is extinguished upon their death. There is no afterlife. Yes, Natan?
No, I saw this is so familiar.
Of course it's familiar.
All this part, I know that I read this in other place, I can't remember where.
This section of Mishnah is where Rambam wrote his 13 principles of faith. Because we're going to find that there are certain believers or non-believers who are in this category of no share. And Rambam sought to explain what these non-beliefs were that got no share and what beliefs you needed to get a share, kind of. There's a lot of argument about exactly what Rambam was doing. We'll probably talk about that more next week. But the basic idea is we are now going to hit a list
of things that write you out of all existence. That is huge. We've been talking about murder and incest and rape and all sorts of other horrible, horrible behaviors. And if you remember, we talked also about how they may be buried in places that were not noble, that couldn't be buried with their regular families, but then they were transferred once they were bones to the family tomb. Which means even the worst of the worst serial murdering cannibal barbarian still has a share in the world to come. The people we are about to list don't. That is a very radical notion. Well, first of all, the idea that we're all automatically in is a very radical notion and very counter to many other faiths, but that some are exempted is also going to be very radical. So let's get our list out, and then we're going to have to probably break them down into piece by piece. We'll see whether we can do that today or tomorrow or today or next week. Let's get the list out.
He who maintains that resurrection is not a biblical doctrine, that the Torah was not divinely revealed, and an apikoros.
Apikoros, okay, which comes from the Greek word Epicurean. That's where the apikoros, the Hebrew word apikoros, comes from the Greek word Epicurean, which is a type of philosophy, and it doesn't answer any question yet, because we're not talking strictly about an Epicurean. But it's a term that became synonymous with wrong believer. So we've got three categories here, right? If you say res is not biblical, right? And if you say Torah not divine, if I'm not mistaken, yes? Right, I'm just making sure I got, and if you are...
And what about Torah was written by someone inspired by heaven? That's part of this or not?
I don't know, is it?
I don't know.
Now you know why Rambam wrote a lot. And by the way, although I did a little Yigdal intro, Rambam did not write Yigdal, which is just a few lines. Rambam wrote page after page after page trying to explain what he believed was meant by all of this. And then people wrote book after book after book about what they thought this and Rambam and everyone else meant by this. So if you think we're going to come to the conclusive, definitive answer either tonight or even next week, you're out of luck. But we will cover questions like that. But first, I want to make sure we just understand these are the three categories that the first section of the Mishnah, the Svama, the unnamed editor of the Mishnah, is bringing to us. And now we're going to get a few additions by Akiva and Shaul.
Rabbi Akiva says, even one who reads
Canonical
books, and one who whispers a charm over a wound and says, I will not bring upon you any of the diseases which I brought upon the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer.
All right, you've heard of a dog whisperer. This is the wound whisperer.
Now, external books, okay, or Sfarim HaChitzonim, meaning non-Jewish books, like for example, medicine, philosophy.
Good question.
And there's a good way to fight with the Greek and Roman culture,
Or are we talking about books that others claim are canonical, but were not included within our actual canon?
The Maccabees.
Well, like the Maccabees for some, or for example, the Gospels in Christianity, which Rabbi Akiva would have been familiar that the early Christians had their own texts that they claimed were canonical and from God. So are we simply talking you can only read the books of the Bible, and if you open up Harry Potter or the encyclopedia or the Farmer's Almanac, you've lost your share in the world to come? Or are we talking if you read books that are counter to the canon, you lose your share? Or is it a very narrow range of books that were in competition among certain groups that were deliberately trying to attack Judaism, that if you read their books, that you are now losing your share in the world to come? Yeah, we're going to have to talk about that. But I want to make sure you understand there's a number of different ways of reading non-canonical books. And whispering over a wound, we've got on the board. We'll come back to that in just a second. But then Rabbi Shaul or Abba Shaul adds in.
Also, one who pronounces the divine name as it is spelled.
And that means they say the Yud He Vav He not as Adonai, the way we normally do, but they say it as it actually is spelled out, which, if you notice, begins with a Yud, not with an Ah. So we never pronounce it the way it is written. We pronounce it using the surrogate form Adonai. But presumably, in his day, many more people knew how to pronounce God's name correctly, but chose incorrect times to use it. There's really only one correct time in his generation, which would have been during the Yom Kippur service in the temple, which actually wasn't even taking place during his lifetime, but it was taking place earlier. Okay, you do one of these, and you lose your share in the world to come. You murder babies and eat their eyes, and you don't. Are y'all okay with that?
Because this, again, is connected with the previous one. They are infractions against God. It's like you don't believe on God. So if you don't believe on God and in His mitzvot and His rule, so you don't have any place in after work with God constantly and permanently.
Okay, so everyone's fine with that? You can behave as bad as you like as long as you believe in God.
That's my.
And somebody who's as righteous as they want to be, but who says, I don't believe in God, you are set up for existential oblivion upon your death. And that seems perfectly fair.
I think it's kind of controversy because in the Ten Commandments it says, do not kill, do not murder.
Mm-hmm.
But then you murder somebody and you're still eligible for the club.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, let's be very clear. The very premise of Judaism, as exemplified by Yom Kippur, but time and time again reinforced, is that there are a load of commandments that we are all supposed to do, and none of us are believed to get to the end of our life without having broken at least a few of them. Most of us breaking lots of them, many of them repeatedly.
Every day.
Some of them every day. Okay? I mean, and so the basic proposition is you will go through your life making mistakes, and those mistakes are breaking the laws of God, but you're still part of the club unless you're on this list.
I think this list actually is not doing the rules of God or the commandments of God. It's denying these even exist. That's the problem.
Okay, so the problem is, if I can just rephrase what you're saying, is somebody who sits in Las Vegas and commits every sin known to man and a few that they invent on their own is not saying that they are separate from God or that there is no God or that God was wrong or that the Torah itself is false. They're just saying, I love what I'm doing too much to stop. They're not acting against God per se, or even if they are, they're not denying that God exists. They're just saying, I want this more than I want God. And therefore, they're not creating a separation between themselves and God. They may be creating a separation between themselves and the right path, but they're not pushing God directly, God's self, the idea of God or Torah, away.
So that's what they say. That is the same idea they say, but you say that you disagree.
Well, I'm not sure that we've really proved that enough. I mean, I'm whispering over a wound. You know, I've got my arm cut and I'm like whispering, quoting this. That's in the same league as the Torah isn't divine? Or
Because maybe what you say that the whisper in the wound is like what God said that we cannot have
sorcerers and magicians.
Magician, maybe the same idea. So it's also going against the main idea of God.
Yeah, but we talked a little while ago about if you have somebody who believes they are a sorcerer, then they can be punished if there's testimony and executed and all of that. But we never said that when we did that, they were going to lose their share in the world to come.
Because we charge in this war. What happened in the next war, God charged what happened.
We
So-
just judged the next world.
No, no. We say that, yeah, but we don't know. Like, we suggest
Wait, wait,
God
wait, 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 wait,
the-
wait, wait,
the-
wait.
the
Hold on, wait a
punishment.
minute.
We don't know if he will take or not.
Hold on a second. Are you trying to say that the Hachamim, the great sages, they're just think this is what's true, but they don't have any real certainty of what God cares about? Then can I just take all the copies of the Talmud and all the copies of Talacha and just say questions? This is what the rabbis thought maybe we kind of sort of should do and maybe God liked. You either accept that the Hachamim were our first line in understanding how we have traditionally understood what Torah means in the real world, not just reading it in my living room, and therefore I will take all of its words seriously as having been transmitted and shared generation to generation, or else it's just, like Confucius, a really, really smart group of people who sat down and wrote up what they thought were good ideas for living a good life.
Maybe a blueprint what God wants for us here in this world, so we can control, rabbis can control his platform, his will in this world. So that's why everything that we study in Sanhedrin. However, in the afterward, the rabbis cannot have the influence, really directly in the outcome as in this world. So, and that's why everything that go against God directly.
An excellent idea that the rabbis focused on creating a system that would help us control a better world here and now. And what happens after you die, that we don't know, except historically we know threatening people with what happens after they die is one of the best motivators to get them to sign on to your group.
Right.
Well, and what did they do? They threatened people with just a handful of things, and all of the really hard stuff, they said, yeah, we know you're going to have trouble with that. It's okay. Come back and repent and we'll be good. I mean, don't murder doesn't get me scratched off the list. If you want to keep me from murdering, shouldn't you have said if you murder someone, you will not have a share in the world to come? Therefore, do not murder anyone. You lose your share. Cheat someone in business. If you cheat someone in business, you will have no share in the world to come. That's a way to keep someone honest. Tell them that they lose eternity if they try to get an extra $100 out of someone. But it isn't what they said. This is not just a system created in order to condition, manipulate, shape the society. This is based upon a deep belief by our sages of what does and doesn't work, both in this world and the next. And we're going to have to leave it at that. And I do promise we will get to a couple different explanations of why this list and what's happening here, either according to rational, mystical, theological, different ways of understanding what's going on here. But one thing to do understand and to take away is that I often get annoyed when I hear people say, well, Judaism doesn't really force you to believe anything. It's all about what you do. No. Judaism doesn't force you to believe a lot, but the few things that we're going to talk about that Judaism does think are on the top of the list are there for a reason and are promoted strongly. In fact, with stronger terms than anything else in the entire body of Jewish law. So we system of belief, not only a system of action. So stay tuned.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have a question.